Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Get those managers developed throughout your organization, having them understand exactly what engagement is about, the role they play in the whole engagement scheme. It's not just the organization that comes back and our scores were very low. Well, that comes back down to every manager.
Good morning, good evening, good midday, depending upon where you are in the world. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. And our guest today is a good friend, senior partner, Ron Porter, senior partner at Korn, Ferry, where he recruits chief human resource officers and advises that same team of people. Ron was previously the vice chairman of CT Partners, another search firm in the U.S. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He holds an MBA from the University of Colorado. Ron, how are you? Good to see you.
Very good. Good to see you, Ron, as well.
Thank you for being
your name.
Yes, right? Never forget my name, right? So
Yeah.
Thank you for being a part of the series today. And I wanted the topic that we want to discuss. It says here the Executive Search CHRO series, but I wanted to move it a little beyond that. The new role of the post-COVID leader, and what does that look like? I mean, you're in the driver's seat, your firm, and you do global searches to find people. What do you find is the key change in executive search over a period of time?
Yeah, I would say if you're talking specifically about the last 18 plus months or so with COVID, and there's some things that have come, I mean, very tragic situation for far too many people, but there are some things that have come out of it that I think were trends already occurring, but have been accelerated.
Okay.
Use of technology, to say from practical thing, I've had people hired who've never been physically in the same room as the organizations they've joined.
Okay.
That accelerates the process from a real practical and tactical level, because oftentimes to get everybody together that this candidate need to talk to would take 4 or 5 weeks, because you need to get everybody at once. You didn't want Joe going from California where he's at to New York 3 different times, but now you can do that over the course of 2 or 3 days, because you can get who's available when, because it's being done virtually. So there's some things like that, but I would say the challenges are going to be to corporate cultures where we have people that haven't really worked together in person. You don't have that informal time that you would have in the break rooms and those kinds of things. So what I see happening and evolving is those things to develop the culture and bring on board new people, new executives, much more deliberate, much more thoughtful. So I think in some ways things are going to be better as a result of that, and more focused. But then you'll have that, how do people really want to work? Do they really want to work in a virtual world, or largely virtual world? But at the end of the day, I think, as I see it, I think there's going to be some organizations that go back to what they did before.
Okay.
There are going to be others who accelerate where they're going, which was going to be virtual anyway. And then most are going to be a little more virtual than what they once were.
Hybrid, yeah.
A hybrid. And I think that's going to be the majority of organizations. They're going to be in that hybrid world with the need to, how do we manage, create culture, coordinate, be more deliberate about what we do when we don't have infinite, if you will, FaceTime and physical presence.
Wow. So, something you mentioned, you said go through the hiring processes, it's all done virtual and you never were in the same room. What advice would you give someone that's going through a virtual interview as to how do you present the brand of you? If it's all virtual, you can't read body language and a whole lot of other things come into play when you're inside that room. What advice would you give someone for that? How do you coach, your people, the people you've identified to handle this kind of all virtual kind of interview?
Well, at one level, you could make an argument you lose the impact in terms of a candidate of presence. In some people that serves them well, others maybe not so well.
Okay.
And so that is what it is. It's hard to project presence, if you will, and it's hard to even define what does that mean when it's all said and done. But it's hard to project it virtually. In terms of the organization, is this the right one to join? I haven't had a chance to sit down with, say, the CEO or my peer group, or maybe even some key subordinates as I would join, say, as a CHRO. How do I really assess that? I would say that, it is and was a challenge. I would say today, though, my recommendation would be before accepting or as frankly, from my client perspective, before offering, in today's world, at least, you should have at least one face-to-face meeting.
Okay.
And I think that's going to probably be the outcome of all of this over the long run is it's going to be virtual until the last step. And that's when you visit people.
Yeah.
And I think we're at that point where people are doing that now. And what will fall off is all those face-to-face meetings that were occurring before you got to the end point of the search and said, let's make sure this is the right fit for you and the right fit for us.
So we had a conversation last week and you were talking about how the business CHRO searches and high-end searches, and you're involved in that executive search group for CHROs, and how that's changing somewhat, and it's kind of transitioned to more in advisory. Can you walk through the advisory aspect of the role you play in that transition?
Yeah, well, here's what I would say to that. And one of the reasons why, and this will be a bit of an advertisement, arguably, for Korn Ferry.
That's okay.
One of the reasons why I joined Korn Ferry 7+ years ago now was because Gary, our CEO, Bernison, was pulling together a firm that offered search, but also advisory services.
Okay.
And I would say particularly for the searches I do, which is predominantly CHRO and their teams, those were the clients of many of the firms that Korn Ferry had acquired. When I was at PepsiCo, some of the firms that Korn Ferry had acquired, for example, there was a firm called Global Novations, which was the biggest DE&I player in the market. Well, that became part of Korn Ferry about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, actually. I used them when I was at PepsiCo to help us with our DE&I strategy and also training. And as I looked at it, I said, well, these services that we have acquired are largely services that support the organization's effectiveness at delivering results, not necessarily strategy, but effectiveness delivering results. And I said, well, that's the CHRO's world. If a company is relying on the CHRO to figure out their business strategy, then I'd be a little bit nervous. CHRO to know what it is and ought to be a contributor. But what the CHRO in today's world really has evolved to, beyond simply doing administrative work, is how do I make this business strategy come alive as quickly as possible? How do we gain the benefits? How do we implement it? Do we have the right people? Are they in the right roles? Do we have the right structure? And at Korn Ferry, the beauty of what I saw Gary doing and what he has done is that not only can we place the CHRO, but we can help that person be successful because all of our advisory services are geared around implementing strategy.
Okay. So that's not just putting me in there and I get in there and I see a total disaster and maybe I need someone to bounce that off, the coaching side, advisory side to do that.
Exactly. We would have a strong option in almost anything a CHRO would confront and need external help on. And a lot of that, I would say is also just the notion that I place you, let's say, and it's not so long, good luck. It's let me know how I can help ensure you're successful, because I've got an array of options and maybe not always the best answer for anything you might have, but I've got an option and we can talk about it a little bit and decide whether you need Korn Ferry or you need anybody to help you with that type thing.
Okay. I read an article a while back and they were talking about succession, gravitating that C-suite to that CE's role. And they were saying that the ideal person, this was what the article was talking about, the ideal person for that would be someone that has those strategic chops in human resources, because it's going to be built around people, business strategy, people strategy, and connecting that. And that would be a value add for someone bringing that versus CFO or CMO. Or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and I'd say with like a lot of things, you see one or two things happening in it that is a little bit different from the norm. And you say, well, it's a big trend because you say CHROs getting on boards. Well, 3 people were placed on boards a couple of years ago. Now 6 have been placed on boards. Well, we've doubled. And I said, well, that's true, but it's still 2%, right? So, but here's what I would say. CHROs becoming CEOs is kind of the point. Said, well, that hasn't been a big movement yet, but the seeds for it, I think, have been planted, which would say this. One, if you're in HR, you really need to know the business well, much better than in the past.
Yeah.
And if you're in HR playing a strategic role, you understand how important it is, just as we were speaking earlier, about implementation. How do we get this organization wrapped around the strategy so we can deliver it? And I would say, therefore, you've got some of the big pieces that you need as a CEO. The piece that you might be missing is, well, what is the business strategy? Because as a CHRO, you participate in that, but you are really more operating as quasi chief operating officer in some ways, which is aligning the organization. And I think the alignment of the organization is going to be in the adaptation of the organization to the business strategy is going to be more dynamic than it ever was. I had, as an example, I had dinner last night with the head of HR at PepsiCo. And I would say, and we talked about strategies changing more quickly than ever before, organizations needing to adapt to those strategies, needing to trade out players. So the activity in terms of your talent is so much more dynamic than it's ever been. And it's almost, I would say, you want somebody joining your organization who knows what they're talking about. They know what it means to be a CFO. And then they need to fit our culture, because there's great CFOs who don't fit our culture, and there's some that do. So you want so the next screen is culture. But then I would say a developing third screen is, where are we at in the business cycle? Is this a turnaround situation? Is this a continuous improvement because we've got a good strategy, we've turned the business around, now we're trying to milk it, get some advantage of all the changes we've made? So it's more of a continuous improvement, incremental change. Well, some people are geared towards, I need that big dynamic change. I need the turnaround. And others are, more focused in incremental change, continuous improvement is what I'm all
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
So maybe
Then then more of a drastic piece than doing that. Yeah.
right. So not only do we need to hire somebody who's got the technical skills, knows the role, fits our culture, but is right for the business challenges that we're facing. And that may be a 3-year run.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations tend to say, well, 3-year run, I want my CFO to be here for the next 20 years. Well, your CFO may not be jazzed about doing incremental change.
Yeah.
But traditionally you stay. And so now you've got a racehorse doing the work of a plow horse, so to speak, or vice versa.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of CHROs in this region. I'm based in Dubai and a lot of work out of the APAC region. And this is my conversation to them. Come out of the bubble to see what's going on in your industry. Who's making drastic change, transformation? Where are you on that transformation scale? And begin having those kind of conversations. Is that about what you're talking about? Does that kind of sink into gradual change, or we have to move on a dime because the business was disrupted?
Yeah, I for a long time I've viewed certain roles as those boundary roles.
Yeah,
and I would say the CHRO one has to be. And you see that because I'd say the networking opportunities and so forth, and you see CHROs who really know the best ones really get outside their company bubble and say, what's happening out there? What are the best practices? What's emerging? Because they're the boundary player. Most people, and there's some other positions that you'd say ought to be boundary too, the CHRO's direct staff probably. But once you get to a certain point, the people who are involved, at a more frontline level, let's say, really don't have the time, nor do they have the position to be able to change strategy. So they're heads down focused on what they've got in front of them. The change they're managing is within their company context. It may be a little bit more tactical at some level with external focus, but it's the guys at the top of the organization and women who really need to keep an ear to the ground and spend a fair portion of their time outside of the four walls of their organization.
One of the things you mentioned, I got a flashback because when I left New York and I moved to Saudi Arabia as Chief Human Resource Officer for an organization there. One of the things I did not dig into as much as I should have, the staff that I was inheriting. So you mentioned the staff, because I inherited a transactional staff. And my thrust was to strategize, connect, and do all the things of the modern day CHRO. And I'm thinking, how did I miss that? But I wasn't thinking about the people that I was going to be working with. I did a kind of a roundtable interview with people, but I didn't really get into skill sets, capabilities, and I was basically all alone. But I had one person who was kind of on the same page I was. So let's talk through the search capabilities. And is that something you advise in trying to understand what you're inheriting? Because if you're coming in to make this strategic shift and really get into strategy and all of that, but your department is basically 90% transactional, you're gonna have an issue. And I had an issue.
Yeah, and I can say I've seen many situations where you've got, the HR job comes open for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And you've got a CEO who would say, I need a strategic partner.
Yeah.
Because my previous CHRO was not strategic. He was more administrative and so forth and so on. So I want to recast that role. And then so you bring in that strategic partner in there, fair number of HR people that are that. But they're inheriting a staff that hasn't operated at that level. And I would say two things. One, if you're coming into a new role, you need to make sure politically that your team is aligned with how you approach things, your values. And there may be some who thought they should have had the job and, so forth and so on. So you need to be practical and, not Machiavellian, but you need to, say, are these guys really aligned and really want to work in my best interest, or some of them, foot out the door? And so I think you need to be very proactive about getting to know the team, their capabilities, because you're going to need strategic thinking, business oriented subordinates, because you can't be the only one. And if you are, the odds of you having a team that can even implement what you're talking about is not that great. But they got to be, you ideally want a team that's coming to you with stuff.
Ideas and
driving the business and so forth. So you're trying to sort out all these ideas, which is the ideal. The next best thing is you've got a team that can execute at a strategic level, and you're the one guy thinking strategically. The worst thing is they can't execute at a strategic level, and you're the one guy thinking and the one guy trying to get it done. So, but the ideal is to have a team that's aligned and strategic within their functional areas of expertise at a minimum, and they've all got to be connected to understanding the business.
If the question would have been asked during that time, what keeps you up at night? That's what kept me up at night. And I said I would never make that mistake again, because I just did not have it. But I was able to overcome that in some ways, because I had one gentleman who was looking to do more, and those kind of conversations kind of extended. So let's move it back to the people that aspire to be the CHRO. Maybe they're VP now or SVP, maybe -1, -2, but their ultimate goal is to become that senior HR person, the number one HR person in that organization. What advice would you give to them at their current state, whatever it is now? How should someone begin to prepare for a C-suite role?
Yeah, well, I would say in today's world, and I can't hit this nail hard enough, you really need to know the business and have a high level of business acumen. And I would say that's because as a business leading CHRO, which is in demand today, you really need to be able to connect the agenda to the business. And I think, and it can't be, not to go too far off the question, but I remember putting in a CHRO at a Fortune 200 company that was pretty well run. A lot of best practices had been implemented within the HR function, but they didn't really need some of those best practices. It was like the bridge to nowhere. So this process was great, but it didn't connect to what we need to do from a business standpoint. But it was a best practice. And I say, well, you want a best practice, but you got to be selective, because you need the ones that the business needs, not just generically. This would be a selection process that, gets written up in Harvard Business Review. Well, does the business really need that though? So the business orientation, you've got to get that, and you got to get it early, and it's got to become second nature. The next thing I would say is strategic thinking. You've got to think at an enterprise level to become a CHRO, because you are the enterprise leader. There is no HR person on top of you. You're where the buck stops. And the final thing I would say, it still is about making it happen, getting things done. So delivering results. And I would say this, in today's world, staying at one organization for 20, 25 years is not helpful. That used to be something that organizations, frankly, when I was at PepsiCo, we would want to hire the person who was, say, at P&G for 15, 20 years. The issues you had is their adaptability was very low. The breadth of their experience was low. And when I go in and talk to CEO, I'd say your best candidate is going to be somebody, and it's important to have industry experience these days, more so than ever, because you really need to know the business. And it's a little hard to know the business if you've been in consumer goods and now you're going to a financial services firm. And I'd say, yep, you used to be able to do that. But that's when HR was a little bit more generic and a little bit more administrative. Now it's business connected. You need to have good business perspective to become in as a CHRO. So I'm kicking off a project, hopefully soon, with a financial services firm. They want somebody who's had financial services experience. And I'd say, I appreciate that. Your ideal candidate is going to be somebody who's had that experience, but who's also been somewhere else in another industry.
Yeah.
So they've seen more things. They've got the technical business orientation that you're looking for, but they also have breadth. And I'd say to prepare to become a CHRO, you need both. And most likely you're going to need to take a smaller job in a smaller company, because the big jobs typically either go inside for the next CHRO, or they bring in somebody from the outside, but who's been a CHRO.
Okay.
So it's a conundrum. How do you get to be CHRO if the requirement is to be a CHRO?
Yeah. So how do you map that out? So you mentioned business acumen, and this is what I find a lot, because I do a lot of projects for HR teams. And I asked the question, how many of you can articulate 1, 2, or 3 of the strategic thrusts of your organization, whether it's 2021, 22, 23? And I get this, I call it the HR look, not having a clue as to what that is. And my thinking is, or what we're going to be talking about over the next few days, is you need to understand that, because your role is kind of the architect putting all that together. So the business acumen side is a huge deficit in the HR function. And I know that from fact.
Yeah. And I'd say, if you think about it, as you talk about, if you're an HR person and you'd say, well, here are my 3 biggest accomplishments. I put in this, I did this, and did that. And I'd say, great. What was the impact on the business? How did that drive revenue? How did that reduce costs?
Yeah.
Why'd you do it? Other than it's neat and it's kind of cutting edge.
Yeah.
Tell me how it drove revenue. So what's the impact on the business? And I think if you think about things in that term, and in an interview setting, you'd say, well, here's something I've done. You talk about it, and you say, before you finish, what's the impact on the business? Which is the ultimate measure of whether that was useful or not.
Yeah. I call that the talent value chain. So you manipulate levers here, but how does it impact the business? And that brings me back to what you talked about earlier, was the concept of best practices. Well, and I see this online. People say, I want to know the best practices. I said, well, a few of these best practices were in new technology. Maybe the average age was mid-30s, and you're a legacy organization. You've been around 100 years, maybe a little different. So it's good for context, but you have to figure out, or what you need to realize is that it may not scale.
How does that play to my game?
Yeah.
Do I need that? I mean, it's wonderful and it's good to know all of that. You don't want to be naive and not know what's going on out there and what the latest trends are and so forth and so on. So you don't want to not know. And that's why we're not doing it, because I'm just unaware. But at the next level is, this is wonderful, but here's why it doesn't fit for what we're trying to get done, where we're at in our organization, or how we might need to adapt it. And so again, I think, and it's not that difficult to do if you know the business. It's pretty easy to then translate. Well, what's the HR agenda? What do we what we should be focused on? Not just doing things because they're neat things to do and it's the latest thing. Do we need it?
We can check the box, right? Well, yeah, we've done that.
Yeah. No, and there's a lot. We put in this world great recruitment system, or our turnover, even results. Our turnover's low.
Yeah.
Senior team has been together for 20 years. Well, maybe it'd be better if you had some turnover there. It's maybe this senior team or these players, simply because they're there, and simply because you have low turnover, doesn't mean you're optimizing performance. Okay.
So at least I can verify from what we've talked about so far. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one that thinks these kind of things, and trying to convey this with clients to understand that. So let's take a look from the CEO's perspective. Do you find that CEOs, when they reach out to Korn Ferry and they're looking for this CEO, or the CEO mentality change relates to people and the person who's going to run that function? Are you looking for something different?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think this is a trend that's been accelerating. And I could make that statement probably at any point over the last 15 years. It's accelerating and it continues to accelerate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the move. CEOs, I think, increasingly recognize HR is critical to my success.
Yeah.
I need somebody in that role that can do a couple of things for me. One, make sure the organization, the talent in the organization is right for the task at hand, right for the mission. They're well positioned, well trained, well motivated to make things happen. And my HR person is key to that. The second thing I would say is that I see increasingly is, who do I talk to at the end of the day to kind of download?
Yeah. All of them. The
Ideally,
load.
it should be the HR person.
Yeah.
You know, how am I managing my team? What are my blind spots?
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to say the HR person is the CEO coach or whisperer or whatever, but to some degree that is the case.
Yeah.
You know, who's got an overview spot, who knows talent, knows people, and can give me feedback, input to help me be a better CEO.
Okay.
And if my HR person can do that, then I'm golden.
Okay.
As a CEO.
Okay.
And I think increasingly CEOs are looking for that because they may have had it before they were CEO, division president, let's say. And I've seen many CEOs. I can think of a situation where division president becomes CEO of another company, brings their former division HR head with them.
Okay. Okay.
To be the HR head. Because I've worked alongside this person for the last 5 years or whatever it may be.
And
he or she knows me, can coach me, can, I share a brief example, you know, at the NBA a few years ago, David Stern was the commissioner, had run through several HR people.
Yeah.
Until he found the right one who could give him feedback that in a way that he could digest it. The others try to give him feedback in ways that he, you know, said, I need somebody different, you know, kind of butting heads. But the one who was most successful and had been with him a long time towards the end, through the end of his tenure, found a way to do that. And so I think that's one of the tricks of being a CHRO is that partnership with the CEO, being able to either, you know, develop that kind of relationship where, again, I don't want to, you know, say you're the CEO coach. He's simply my puppet. But,
but
there is
in other words, having their relationship. So you're kind of that sounding board. Hear me out on this.
Right. And as a junior, a division HR head or business unit HR head, being able to develop that relationship with your business leader is something that, you know, you need to be able to do it with multiple people and figure out, oh, how do I do that? And again, big part of it is you need to know the business. Because if you're, you know, talking about administrative things, that person's going to lose interest pretty quickly.
Ron, we're going to pause for a commercial break. We'll come right back in just a bit. Okay,
sure.
Thank you so much.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
I want to tag on to one of the comments. Joy Branch. Joy, thank you for listening in. Joy says, definitely a need to know the business. And you mentioned business acumen. Give us a few points of how do we understand the business, or how can we get better at understanding that?
Well, you can argue at some level from an educational perspective to begin with. If you're an HR person today, as an example, and you're looking to get a quote unquote advanced degree, do you go to Cornell to get a master's in industrial labor relations? I'd say no. You'd be better off getting an MBA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beyond that base building, I would say is you've really got to, throughout the levels of the organization, spend time with the people at the front line of the business, understand what they're facing and so forth. Then you need the broader context. Get to the CFO, get to the COO, get to the division president, get to the region presidents, get to the sales managers, and see what's keeping them awake at night. See what their challenges are from a business perspective, not from a narrow talent perspective, which oftentimes, if it's an HR person, I'm going to talk about talent. Ask them more broadly. What's keeping you awake at night and why? And how are you approaching it? Because I think as an HR person, you've got all sorts of access to people within your business who you can learn from.
So from the Korn Ferry side, have you seen an uptick in CHRO searches?
No question. Yeah.
They've realized that, well, we got to change this tire, because in order to get to this level, we need something different.
Yeah, I can say this. I have a good friend who ran HR for a long time at General Mills. And he was proud of the fact that he lived through 4 different CEO transitions over the course of his tenure.
Okay.
And I would say he should be, because most of those CEOs, all of them actually, came from inside. But I would say, on the other hand, if you live through 4 CEO transitions as a CHRO, and those CEOs came from the outside, I suspect that those CEOs didn't care enough about HR to change out the role. Their thinking would be, I need my CFO, I need my COO, I need to have my team around me. And for continuity's sake, I'll keep the HR person. And so the HR person, largely administrative, not strategic, not an important enough role for me to trade out. And it allows me to trade out these other roles that are more important. So today, I see you get a new CEO, even internally, they're going to want their person.
That's right.
As a CHRO, because that role has become critical to them. You see, I had a conversation last night, with a CHRO who left one company because his CEO left, and he knew the person coming in, which was a peer at one point, needed his own person. And didn't want to stay there and try to hang on, which he could have. But he proactively said, it's time to leave. So the CHROs, increasingly, if the CEO leaves, it's like the old pharaohs in Egypt. You get buried with the emperor. Alive or not.
In a nice way. It's time to go, because we're looking for
go. And you see that happening increasingly because the CHROs become more important. Each person wants their customized CHRO.
Through that lens of understand it. So one of the things I always, when I talk to an HR audience, and I've always kind of filtered my career through, I want to be seen as a business person first. but my lens happens to be human resources. And I've
Yeah.
always kind of anchored it on that, because the value of those two letters together, in a lot of cases, there is no value. But
Yeah.
the value that I perceive when I walk in that room as a business person, and I'm going to interpret the conversation through the lens of people, would be more useful to the organization performance and all those kinds of approaches.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say, because I've talked, and we both have talked a lot about knowing the
Yeah.
business and being a business person first and so forth and so on. I do remember a conversation that I had years ago. Individual's name Olden Lee at PepsiCo. It was running HR for Taco Bell
Mhm.
when PepsiCo owned the restaurants. And he said that he went out and talked to the region HR guys, and they knew the business. He couldn't tell the difference whether he was talking to the region manager or the region HR person. They knew the business so well. But then he came back and said, "Who's doing the HR stuff, though?" So you can't lose
Yeah.
that, because that
Yeah.
is your special power.
Yeah.
It's not,
So
I know the business as well as the business leaders, which
yeah.
good to say, but your special power is you know how to leverage the talent
Mhm.
to help drive
Mhm.
the business.
Yeah.
That's why you're there. You need the context. So I don't want to lose sight of, you need HR
Right.
expertise.
So that's kind of that balanced approach. So I'm
Yes.
here understanding that, but also I'm maxing out the performance side of the day-to-day responsibilities of making sure the trains run on time.
Yes, you've got to be able to do both. You got to be able to do the basics. And I'd say, the basic stuff, over the years, this has been something that continues to gain momentum and is almost a standard these days.
Mm-hmm.
You have HR generalists with the administrative HR stuff being shifted to centers of excellence.
Yeah, COEs, yeah.
And you have, business process centers. You have subject matter experts at the center that you can pull on. So you're almost the HR consultant in some ways to that division.
Yeah.
You're not bogged down by worrying about whether people got their medical forms in or not.
Yeah.
So organizations have done a good job of doing that. Many, I'd say. The smaller organizations maybe don't have it, but then I'd say, if you're the HR leader in a small organization, you might want to look at outsourcing some of that stuff.
Okay.
So you can get your team focused really on being true business partners and pulling the levers for the outside support around subject matter expertise or basic HR operations.
Okay. So in closing, I wanted to ask you, for CHRO is in that role, and maybe a new CEO came in and they're struggling to try and ramp up, whether it's business acumen, whether it's integrating new processes. What advice would you give them? Because I know you do a lot of advisory work,
Yeah. To the CHRO dealing with the new CEO or the new CEO?
So either case, how would I ramp up my capabilities of doing this role in a new environment?
Yeah, well, the one thing I think successful transitions, as I've seen it, the new player coming in, be it a CEO or, more specifically here, CHRO, is one, asking a lot of questions, withholding comment. Don't weigh in until you've really done your baseline work about understanding the organization, understanding the challenges, and as importantly, letting that organization, the people in that organization, know that you've heard them. Then the second thing is, once you've spent time doing that, and most people don't spend enough time because they would see something and then they want to jump right in.
Yeah.
And organizationally, they may not have the credibility. They could be off base because they don't, haven't.
They don't really know. They just
understood
got
why
there.
the situation really is.
Yeah.
And I'm cautious about that because I've heard people share a situation and that they're struggling with, and then I can't assume that, well, within 15 minutes of hearing what you're talking about, here's your solution. I'd say, well, one, I'm not that smart.
Yeah.
Two, you're probably not that dumb. So
Yeah.
there's probably more to this, because if you're struggling with it, your team's struggling with it, it's
Yeah.
unlikely in a short conversation I'm going to be able to give you an answer.
Yeah.
But I'd say develop credibility, truly understand the problem, then take action. And you may need advertisement for Korn Ferry to bring in an outside resource.
Bring in you and your team to.
Because to be fair, we've probably seen this several times over.
Yeah. Nothing new.
More so than any single individual has, who's worked in 2 or 3 or 4 companies even. We're working with hundreds. So there is a perspective that outside advisors can bring to the table that can be very helpful in terms of what else is going on. How might we approach this? Have you seen other organizations struggling with this? So I would say, as a new CHRO, you almost want to look at it as, I'm orchestrating this. I don't have to be the answer to everything.
Yeah.
I need to be able to do the right homework, bring in the right people, and then kind of decide based on my own feelings, but also what I've heard and the perspective I have. So I think most people rush too quickly. Maybe they view it as getting some quick wins because it's low-hanging fruit. I'd say, well, low-hanging fruit, it may be low-hanging because there's a lot of wires connected to this thing.
Yeah, you pull one thing and everything collapses.
The people that you're joining, that you can come in a month or 2 and solve all their problems, because they're probably a little bit smarter than that. And these problems are probably a little bit more entangled than you think.
Okay. Ron Porter, thank you so much, my man. So good to see you again. And hopefully I will see you when I get back to New York.
Yeah,
so hang on for a minute. Hang on for a minute as we begin to close out. Thank you.
Sure, I will.